fun, and I meant to keep it light, but then a couple little serious elements will work their way in. But I guess maybe part of the reason why I got interested in exotic animals in the Renaissance period, as all of you know, that's the time period that I study. But the part of the reason why I got interested in the history of exotic animals and trafficking and trading of exotic animals was partly from looking at art, like the image that you can see here, which we'll look at in some more detail in a minute, but also because a couple of years ago, right before I came to CBU, I was doing a research fellowship at a university in Germany, and I did a cycling trip with my partner for like 10 days, cycling around Germany. And one day we were just like cycling along, everything was normal. And then all of a sudden there was like lions in this meadow. And I was like, what are lions doing in Germany? And it totally freaked me out. Anyways, they were in cages, and it was a traveling circus that had used this random meadow to keep all of their animals before the show that night. So there was lions and zebra, and it was just the weirdest thing to see in the middle of a field in Germany as I was riding by on my bike. And it got me thinking about what that would have felt like for people in the time period that I study, the Renaissance or the early modern period. So that's sort of kind of the backstory behind how I got interested in this little subtopic that I just basically look at for fun, to look at artwork. So feel free to interrupt me at any time, and I can't see you or the chat, so just feel free to just speak up and interrupt me.
Can you see the like the raising hand option?
I can't see anything. All I can see is my slides, and then a little box that has like the mic button to mute myself or to turn off my video.
Right. Okay. Well, so if that's the case, then yeah, I guess that's the only way we can do questions.
Yeah, just interrupt me. Like, this is very informal, so
yeah. Okay.
Please feel free to jump in at any time. Okay, so like I often do in courses that many of you have taken with me, I'll start with like a brief little story to get us into this topic. So in November of 1487, in Florence, Italy, which is, let me see if my slides will let me go. There we go. A city that I know most of you know some stuff about now, also from taking history classes at CBU with me. This is the city that I primarily focus on in my research. So in November of 1487, in Florence, the city's de facto ruler, who was a guy named Lorenzo de' Medici, who belonged to the wealthy banking family, the Medici dynasty, which over the course of several centuries, the Medici family produced many princes and dukes and popes and queens, and they were the patrons that commissioned many of the great Renaissance artworks, not all of them, but many of them. So in November of 1487, this de facto ruler, he was essentially a wealthy businessman who had taken control of the city. He had a ceremonial platform erected in the city's main piazza, the city's main square in Piazza della Signoria, which is, can you see my mouse when I move it?
Unfortunately, no.
Oh. Damn. Okay. Well, it's not the main Duomo over there, which I know many of you know, the huge domed cathedral, but the piazza is the tall tower to the on the left side of the screen. So he had this huge ceremonial platform set up in that square by that tower that's closest to the left side of the image. And all of the city's elite crowded onto this raised up platform in the square, and all of the commoners and normal average people in the city crowded into that square and into the streets that emptied into this main piazza. And everyone had gathered there to witness the arrival of an exotic gift that had been sent to Lorenzo de' Medici by the Sultan of Egypt, Sultan Kaiba. And the gift was a giraffe, an animal that the vast majority of people who crowded into the square that day had certainly never seen in their lives, perhaps never even really heard about or had vague ideas of what this animal would have looked like, would have heard about it perhaps in stories, but could it really be true that an animal would have a neck that was so long that it towered up to the third story of a residential building? Giraffes had circulated in Europe, in places like Italy, during the period of the Roman Empire, which was a millennia and a half before this day in 1487. And during the period of the Roman Empire, giraffe, along with lions and bears and rhinos and hippos and elephants, etc., had been imported and moved all around the Roman Empire to the various amphitheaters and colosseums that dotted the Roman Empire, where these great animal battles would take place, would be organized and staged, where they would make these animals fight each other to the death. But by the time we get to 1487, a millennia and a half after that, that's only the stuff of legend. No one had ever seen anything like that. The only recorded giraffe that reached Europe after the period of the Roman Empire was one giraffe that was also sent by a different sultan of Egypt to the king of the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, which is in modern day southern Italy, right in the basin of the Mediterranean at the very tip of Italy. And that was all the way back in 1261. And since then, no giraffe had ever been in Europe. So everybody in this square had never really seen one of these animals, because most of these people had certainly not traveled to parts of the world where giraffe live. There are no medieval depictions of giraffe in medieval artwork, and this meant that the arrival of this giraffe in 1487 was a really exciting event for people, and people were really eager to see it. And the people who crowded into that square on that day were not disappointed. The giraffe was paraded down the narrow streets of Florence, where its head was level with the second and third story of the buildings that you can kind of see in the image there. And it was led by a giraffe handler who had also come from Egypt with the giraffe. And what ensued after this sort of exciting day in Florence was a feverish few months where the giraffe in Florence, which simply became known as the Medici giraffe or Lorenzo's giraffe, became kind of this object of obsession and adoration in Florence. And the giraffe became, for a short period of time, kind of like the unofficial mascot for the city of Florence. The true symbol of Florence is actually a lion, but there was this brief moment in the late 1400s where the giraffe craze took off in Florence. And Lorenzo de' Medici, the de facto ruler who had the giraffe given to him by the Sultan of Egypt, had special stables built for the giraffe, both at the Medici country villa, Poggio a Caiano. And if you look to the right side of the image there, you can see kind of a stable and paddock, and that's where the giraffe would have lived for a while. And this is the country palace, one of the country palaces that the Medici had. And he also had stables built for the giraffe in the center of the city as well, in one of the main streets in Florence. And the stable walls were lined with manure to insulate the stable from those cold, damp Tuscan winters, and hot air from fires that burned 24 hours were pumped into the stables to keep the giraffe warm and happy. Most of the time, however, the giraffe was just allowed to roam the streets of Florence freely. One Florentine writer, a poet named Antonio Costanzo, was living in Florence during the time of the Lorenzo giraffe craze. And he talked about how the giraffe would just roam around the city and you kind of never knew when you were going to run into it. You might turn a corner and then the giraffe would be there, or you would look across the city and you would see kind of this tall, what looked like a tower walking along down the street because its neck was so long. And he talked about how people would throw food to the giraffe out of the windows of their buildings. And we have his writings. He says, I've also seen it raise its head to those onlookers, offering food to it from their windows because its head reaches as high as 11 feet. Thus, seeing it from afar, people think that they're looking at a tower rather than an animal. Ours appears to like the crowd. So it says, he said, this giraffe was very friendly. It liked being with the people, and it was always peaceable and without fear. And it even seems to watch with pleasure the people who come to look at it. Wine break. Okay. So the giraffe's stay in Florence was actually only ever meant to be temporary. Lorenzo de' Medici, soon after he received it from the Sultan of Egypt, planned to send it to the regent queen of France, a woman named Queen Anne. And he said that he was going to send the giraffe westwards to France as a gift for her. So the gift giving of this animal continued on. However, the Medici giraffe's life came to a sudden and tragic end when it died from strangulation, when it became trapped in the ceiling beams of its makeshift stable in Florence, ultimately breaking its neck and dying from a broken neck. And this ended the short-lived reign of the Medici giraffe, this beloved mascot, for a few months over the winter 1487 in Florence. And after that, another giraffe wouldn't be imported into Europe until the 1800s. So this was sort of a brief moment in time. So Lorenzo's giraffe didn't live for very long in Florence, sadly, but it is immortalized in many Renaissance artworks that were produced in and around Florence during this time. And Florence, as many of you know, was kind of an epicenter of Renaissance art production. So, for example, yeah.
Sorry, do you mind if I ask a few questions?
Please.
Yeah. Do we have any way to trace its travel? Like, do we know when it was brought from Egypt, if it went by land or water? Like, do we have ledgers or any journals as this? I'm guessing it's this impressive animal as it's moving towards where it would go. Do we have any record of that surprise kind of traveling?
I know it's strange to imagine how they would have undertaken such a long journey. It definitely went by sea. So from the Mediterranean shores of Egypt across the Mediterranean up the coast to central Italy, and then it would have walked the final couple hundred kilometers inland to get to Florence. We don't know, there's not a lot of records that I know of anyways that talk specifically about the process of transporting this giraffe, but I do have some details about different animals coming up. Yeah, but it's definitely interesting to think about.
Right. And just one other one. Do we have any animal laws in Florence more generally? Like I know later times when we start to see like the exclusion of like oxen or like beef animals, that kind of stuff from cities much, much later on. Did Florence have any laws around that kind of stuff? Because I know smells and stuff where butchers could be that kind of thing.
Totally. Yeah, there were, yes, there were laws about where animals could be kept in the city. And you're referencing, I think, Kima in particular, these fears about the sanitation of animals and in particular the smells associated with them and how it was thought that that could prompt plague and pandemic, right? Is that kind of what you're thinking of?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So there were laws in the 1400s and then continuing on in the 1500s and 1600s about where animals could be kept. Those laws were basically class-based, and what it meant is that animals couldn't be kept near the homes of wealthy people, essentially, is how the city determined those laws, which I guess that shouldn't surprise us.
If I can pay a fine, it's just a matter of how much I can afford.
Exactly, yeah. But it does raise so then it does raise the question of like, butchers, for example, during times of plague and pandemic, were treated as this like polluting class because of the way that they engaged with animals. On the other hand, you have these ultra wealthy people who are collecting giraffes and menageries of aviaries, of birds, and they don't get treated in the same way. However, there is one record that I've come across from a little bit later. It's around from like 1530. And it talks about a wealthy nobleman who is forced to kill his pack of lionesses because of fears that they might be causing plague. So
Fascinating.
I know, yeah. Which, yeah, makes you think about, well, what are the animal laws in the other way about, like, what about animal welfare? Which there isn't too much concern for that during this period in the way that we think about animal welfare now. Yeah. Any other?
Thank you.
I do have a question too.
Yeah.
Is there any record, I mean, it may be coming up later in the lecture, of how the public reacted when the giraffe of Florence died? Or is it just, we don't really know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish there was, because it was so beloved and people taught. There are records like this guy, Antonio, who we see here, talking about how the crowd loved it. It loved to be with the people. Like people really kind of took this animal on as a symbol of this time of peace and well-being and prosperity
Almost
in the
became like
city.
a symbol, sort of, I guess.
Yeah, like a mascot kind of.
And with
Yeah.
animals too, it's just, I guess, people, I don't know, it might have been different back then. People view them almost in a empathetic light, I think. I don't know if
Yeah,
it's
like
different back then.
anthropomorphizing and stuff.
Like, I
Yeah.
always just think of the few years back when that gorilla Harambe was killed, just the whole
Yeah.
outcry afterwards. It was just
I
the
know.
people rallying behind it. It's just, be curious if it was something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, I think that that's like something, I mean, that's what I suspect happened, but I don't have any records to prove that. But given how loved this animal was, um, I think that probably you did have this kind of period of mourning. And you'll see a little bit later in the lecture how people sometimes did memorialize these exotic animals after they died. And actually, that kind of leads into my next point. Should I move on to my next point? Or are there any
No
other
questions
thoughts?
from me, unless anyone else has any other questions.
Okay, so the giraffe, the Lorenzo's giraffe didn't live for very long, but it was immortalized in many Renaissance artworks of the period. For example, here is a fresco, so painted on the wall of a chapel in Florence called the Tornabuoni Chapel. And this is one of the more famous chapels. And this is displaying a really classic Christian scene, the adoration of the Magi. That's, the story of the three wise men and everyone coming to praise the baby Jesus and the Virgin Mary, who have been basically worn away from time. They would have been at the center of the screen, but if you look up this is where I really wish you could see my cursor, but if you look up in the right-hand corner, can you see the giraffe coming down the walkway up there?
Making his way majestically down.
Making his way majestically down, exactly. And this was painted just a few years after the giraffe was brought into Florence. And so this is definitely depicting that giraffe and that moment. And we see this giraffe popping up over and over again in Renaissance art. Here again is another fresco from one of the more kind of famous and important churches in Florence, the Santissima Annunziata Church. And then again, if you look at the fresco that's painted on one of the walls of this church, in the very back towards the right side of the image, again, you can just make out faintly there, again, Lorenzo's giraffe is popping up.
I love how this giraffe is essentially the Where's Waldo of the Renaissance era.
Yeah, totally.
Yes,
It's like all types of artworks. And also,
totally
like
normal Renaissance thing to take your pet giraffe for a walk.
yeah, Yeah. And it's also worth noting that these are like fancy artworks, right? These are the artworks that art historians study and hold up as sort of these really prime examples of Renaissance style and technique. And I just think it's so funny and interesting how Lorenzo's giraffe is just constantly popping up. Here.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Do you
please,
mind
no, go
going
ahead.
back to the first fresco that we saw?
This one?
Yeah. It's really fascinating how time bendy this looks in terms of, you have this, Jesus, we have the Magi going on. We have that little
Yeah.
throwback to the Romans, and then we have a
Yeah.
little bit more of that modern. Like there's definitely three distinct time periods here, and there seems to be no problem with incorporating it all into one
absolutely.
time.
That's the point, right? They're doing that on purpose. Using art to create this notion of sacred time, to connect these three different time periods together, and each one kind of makes the other one more important, right? So these are also, like you will know from taking other courses with me, most of you, these are the faces of Florentines. Like these are actual people in Florence who would have been wealthy, noble families, in particular from the Tornabuoni family. This is their chapel, and they commissioned this piece, the Tornabuoni family, and they would have had their faces painted on here. So yeah, by connecting themselves to the story of Christ, they're kind of creating a direct link between themselves and that sacred story. And then by having these Roman and Greek columns in the background, they're connecting themselves to sort of like the grandeur of the Roman Empire. And then with Lorenzo's giraffe, and then at the very back through that archway, you can see the towers of Florence. They're also connecting themselves as being like really important in their own time period too. Yeah, for sure, Kima. There's like three epochs that are being connected together here.
Yeah. Well, and that power of continuity and writing yourself into history then. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, totally. And
Lorenzo's
writing the
giraffe is
giraffe.
it's like a Renaissance meme.
Yeah, yeah. There it is again. And here it is again. So this is the painting that I used as sort of the cover slide. And this is another fresco, another wall painting that's in pretty good shape. And this is painted onto the wall of Poggio a Caiano, the country villa of the Medici, where they had created the pen for the giraffe when it actually lived. And then they also painted the giraffe several decades later. So the giraffe this is painted in 1520. The giraffe's been dead for several decades now, but we still get him popping up in the background there, Lorenzo's giraffe. And we have a whole bunch of other animals that we'll come back to later. We'll look at this image again, but you can see that there's parrots, there's lions. This guy in red in the center who has the sword, you can see that there's some lions between that cluster of people there. And then over we've got monkeys, and over on the right side there's a turkey, which is an animal, a bird of the Americas. What else? I think the giraffe continues to pop up. Also, I've put these all in chronological order. So this one's painted basically right when the giraffe is in Florence, or it's just died. It's almost immediately after. So the person who painted this probably saw the giraffe in real life. Then we get a couple decades later, the giraffe in the background here, a couple decades later again, further away. If we go to half a century after the Lorenzo's giraffe had been in Florence, we still see it popping up in artworks. Here's the giraffe in the center of the image. And I think I have more. Here, again, we're about half a century out, and this is actually depicting the guy in purple in the middle is Lorenzo de' Medici, that de facto ruler who the giraffe had originally been gifted to. And we see the giraffe again popping up. Yeah, totally a Where's Waldo moment.
The giraffe's always got the same pose, so I'm guessing the later artist just copied off the first guy who would have actually seen it.
Say that again. He's always got the same.
He's got the same pose in all the
Oh
portraits.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, the same pose. Yeah, so
And
all
seems
these
to be getting
people,
smaller.
yeah. So all these people are we're past the period by we get to the 1550s. We're past the period of living memory of the giraffe, right? And now it's sort of being painted based on lore, which gives you, to come back to your question, Avery, about how people felt about this giraffe, it gives you a sense of just how loved and celebrated this animal was. Now, when we get to about a century after Lorenzo's giraffe had lived and died, we get the depictions of the giraffe get stranger and stranger. So what we're looking at here is the Boboli Gardens in Florence, and these are sort of the palace gardens, the Medici palace gardens in the city. You could go there today. They're huge. You could spend a whole day walking around the gardens, and it has a series of grottos in it. And at the bottom, you can see the outside of the grotto, and then the top left-hand corner, you can see inside the grotto, it's been frescoed, and the ceiling and the walls have been painted. And they've been painted with all types of animals. There's bears and leopards and monkeys. And then in the right side image here, where I've zoomed in, you can kind of see this shadowy animal in the bottom right-hand corner, and it kind of looks like a giraffe. It's sort of spotted and seems to have the long neck and chest, but then it's also maybe a deer because it has a much shorter head and it has kind of deer antlers. Do you guys see that? The
Yeah,
bottom.
it's almost kind of giving like if they were smaller, almost like an elk head placed
Yeah,
on
it's
a
kind
body
of,
that doesn't
yeah.
fit it.
Yeah, it's kind of like half elk, half deer, half giraffe. And it almost seems that, like, we have to remember that before Lorenzo's giraffe came to Europe, there hadn't been a giraffe in Europe for several centuries. And after Lorenzo's giraffe, there wasn't another giraffe for many other centuries. So in the art history, as we get further away from the time that the giraffe was actually in Florence, it's sort of like the memory and knowledge of what this animal really looked like begins to fade. And we start to get these kind of half giraffe, half deer. Maybe people are sort of creating their own mixed together animals based on the two. A couple centuries later, after the giraffe was in Florence, if we fast forward to the late 1600s, a different exotic animal became a favorite pet of the Medici and the city of Florence. And this was the hippo of Cosimo Medici III, who was another Medici ruler, but separated from several hundred years from Lorenzo de' Medici. So Lorenzo de' Medici had his giraffe, and when we get to the late 1600s, Cosimo de' Medici has his hippo, which was gifted to him from a diplomat in Africa. And the hippo lived in the Boboli Gardens, the gardens that we're looking at here. We're told that the hippo lived in one of the fountains in the garden, and when it got too hot, would spend the day inside one of these grottos, perhaps this grotto right here that has the memory, the distant memory of the giraffe from several centuries earlier. And after that hippo died, it also lived a little bit longer than the giraffe, but only a couple of years. We're told that Cosimo III was so distraught because he loved this hippo so much that he asked for it to be preserved so that he could sort of memorialize it forever. And this was one of the earliest experimentations with taxidermy. And we can see here's
Oh
Cosimo's.
no.
Yeah, exactly. So,
He's like a
yeah,
sleep paralysis demon.
yeah, totally. The like demon on the chest or whatever. Yeah,
Definitely
so
not a house hippo.
it's not a house hippo, not as cute as a house hippo, and it's not the best taxidermy job, as you can maybe see. I mean, maybe
Elephant.
we
I
should
mean, that
cut this
hippo is quite. He's thin. Like he's not as
thin.
like round as I thought he would be.
Yeah, he's kind of barrel
Stretched
like,
out, kinda, or just yeah, just
yeah,
the proportions are off.
Um,
yeah,
question. Did
yeah.
in the gardens, did
Yes.
this hippo ever kill anyone? Because I think in comparison to a
Yes.
giraffe, sure, those necks, they can do some damage. I've heard that. They're strong creatures, but a hippo is actually one of the creatures that I am most scared of if I ever came
Thank
face to
you for
face with.
pointing that out. Hippos are
Yeah.
Yes,
nasty creatures.
hippos are very, very dangerous. I don't know if you guys know this, but my family is South African, and I was raised with a lot of fear of the hippo because they're very fast, they're very dangerous, they're very aggressive. So although it's not a fear that really impacts my life here in Canada, it's definitely a fear that I was raised with, to be weary of hippos. And yes, Cosimo's hippo killed a 14-year-old boy and attacked several other people at like the fancy garden parties of the Medici.
Ah.
But yeah, yeah. Yeah, so this isn't, as you can see, the best taxidermy job, but I do think that maybe we should cut this taxidermist a bit of a break because it's probably pretty hard to taxidermy a hippo. These are huge animals, and whoever did this, or the team that did this, were doing it without the help of modern chemicals and tools and machinery. And this is one of the earliest experimentations with taxidermy. I mean, mummification is thousands of years old as a practice, and we can see it in many cultures throughout the world, and they do share some similarities. So the field of taxidermy was built off of the knowledge of mummification, and that's partly what was applied to Cosimo's hippo. But what's interesting about the Medici hippo is that it appears that, kind of like in the case of the giraffe, after it died, people sort of forgot what exactly a hippo looked like or what its anatomy was, because most people didn't have detailed knowledge of that because these animals were so rare in Europe and had come from so far and were sort of singular. So what the taxidermist has done here is forced the hippo legs to face forward, almost like a dog's legs would, when in reality a hippo's legs, feet kind of go out to the side. And you can see the front legs have been like really forced to go straight facing. And this is housed in a museum of natural history in Florence. And if you go there and you can get up close to the hippo and you can see on the inside how the skin at its ankles has been like twisted to try to force this animal into a position that's not actually natural to a hippo at all. So much like how 100 years after Lorenzo's giraffe had died, we get these kind of changing halfway depictions of giraffe that are sort of blending with other animals. After the Medici hippo dies, we get these this strange taxidermy. So the Medici hippo didn't live for very long, but it's immortalized in this early example of taxidermy. And similarly, the life of Lorenzo's giraffe was really sadly cut short, but is immortalized in Renaissance art. And I'm always on the hunt for, again, like, yeah, really in that Where's Waldo way. I'm always on the hunt when I'm looking at art for Lorenzo's giraffe. And I don't think that, I'm sure there's other artworks that include it that I haven't found. These are just the ones that I've found. So if you ever find any, send them to me. Okay, so how can we kind of take these examples and think about some broader stuff? When we look at Renaissance art and when we look at surviving written records from the time, we can see very quickly that Lorenzo's giraffe and Cosimo's hippo were not particularly unique. In fact, there were a lot of exotic animals that were in and around various locations in Renaissance European and early modern European cities. animals in particular from Africa, from India, and from the Americas. And these animals were regularly moved and traded and paraded around Europe. And these included cheetahs, lions, tigers, bears, oh my, elephants, giraffe, rhino, parrots, llamas, monkeys, hippos, etc., etc. The list goes on. This, for example, is from the same museum where the Medici hippo is, and these are the Medici big cats, which they also had taxidermied, and these ones turned out a little bit better. But I don't know, it makes me sad. Like, it's sad to think of these animals and the lives that they probably lived. And this is just a taste of the Medici big cat collection. At one point, they had 25 lions living in their main urban palace.
Even to think about the giraffe and again, I don't know, maybe for the cats there was more, but to think of an animal being alone, a lot of the animals we're describing aren't meant to be solitary.
No.
And so even just depression. I mean, I think like llamas, especially alpacas, you have to buy them in pairs because they will just die.
Yeah, I know. It makes me really sad. Yeah, to think of the loneliness and the like trauma that these animals experienced as they were moved and how they were treated.
It almost reminds me a little bit of when, like, at zoos, you see like a polar bear and you know the polar bear does not belong in said zoo because it's too warm and it's just...
It feels wrong.
It feels really like wrong, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Despite that, Renaissance Europeans, especially wealthy ones, almost exclusively wealthy ones, loved collecting these animals. As a couple examples, we have records from the 1300s that Azzone Visconti, who was a very fabulously wealthy northern Italian man who founded the state of Milan, we're told that he had a palatial aviary filled with birds from all over the world, not the Americas, because Europeans had not traveled to the Americas yet by that point. And also that he had a huge animal menagerie. And he had ostrich, lions, monkeys, baboons. A century later, in the 1400s, Ercole d'Este, who was the powerful Duke of Ferrara, which is in central Italy, we have the basically work orders have survived where he hired elite craftsmen to create a series of giant white marble cages to hold his collection of lionesses that he placed at the front of his palace in Ferrara. So to walk into his palace, you had to walk by these pacing pride of lionesses that were encased in these white marble cages. And then in the Kingdom of Naples in southern Italy, the King of Naples was famous for his zebra and his camel that he housed in his city palace. The Pope Leo X, the Pope, one of the most important popes of the 16th century, he was known to be particularly attached to a rare white elephant from India that had been gifted to him from the King of Portugal in 1514 and was sent on a ship from Portugal to Rome. And the elephant had already made the journey from India to Portugal and then was sent eastwards again back across the Mediterranean to be given as a gift to Pope Leo X in Rome. And there, Kima, we have a little bit more information about what it was like to move these animals around. This elephant was strapped between the two masts of the ship that sailed across the Mediterranean. So it sort of swayed on the deck of the ship for the entire journey. And we have the records of the food that it was ordered from the King of Portugal that this elephant be fed every day on the journey. And that included 20 liters of rice a day and barrels of butter. And there was very strict rules sent from the King of Portugal that The elephant had to be rubbed down in oil every day to protect its delicate skin from the salty sea spray. And once the elephant arrived in mainland Italy, it was paraded into Rome and presented to the Pope alongside parrots, Indian fowl, so birds, exotic dogs, a Persian horse, and a cheetah, and also a retinue of African men were all given from the King of Portugal as a gift to the Pope. So that should highlight for us this disturbing way in which these African men are being treated as exotic animals, much like the elephant and the cheetah, and can get us thinking about the ways in which this term exotic can have actually really real profound social, race, class implications, right? Do you guys see what I'm saying there?
The one before you had gotten to the end of that list, what was really popping up in my mind was kind of this creation of, again, in a Christian sense, a Garden of Eden, where you have all these animals of God's creation. And the final addition of the fact that we have men included in this makes me wonder, did people conceptualize the Garden of Eden as having other kinds of human species that weren't seen as human, in a sense? Do you know what I mean? And therefore kind of including that as being under human control.
Did people conceive of the Garden of Eden as having other humans that they placed in a hierarchy? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. I've
Sorry, I know
come
that's out
across
there.
that. Yeah, no, it's out there, but it's a good thought. I've never come across that. Usually what you tend to see, I mean, what we're really talking about here is like the history of racism, right?
For sure.
What you tend to see more so is the Garden of Eden is always depicted as a utopia where only certain races exist, and those races which are treated as less than just simply don't exist in this utopia. So yeah, but I've never seen it the other way in terms of what you're saying of like creating a hierarchy of humans in depictions of the Garden of Eden and then treating those lesser ranked humans as somehow more aligned with animals that like dominant humans can have mastery over. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
In a sense, yeah, because otherwise that would have to mean religiously that they were outside of God's creation, which if everything was created by God, how would you wrap that up theologically speaking?
Yeah.
Very random thought, and very disturbing thought, but yet.
Yeah, no, it is disturbing. Yeah. No, it's a good thought. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a definitive answer for you. I'll keep thinking about that. Yeah. So, where were we at before we went down that path? See, I was going to try to keep it light, and somehow I've ended up talking about the history of racism.
I definitely will take blame for that a little bit.
Okay, so much like with the Pope's elephant and the lions and the cheetahs, much like with the Lorenzo's giraffe, we do have surviving Renaissance artworks that depict these specific animals. This, for example, is the Pope's favorite elephant. And here, the elephant was named Hanno. And I've titled this as After Raphael. Raphael is one of the most famous Renaissance artists, and this was not drawn by Raphael, but it's of his school of art. So a little art history. One of the things that we know for sure is that a lot of these great Renaissance artists, like Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, Botticelli, etc., they often weren't painting all of their artworks. Instead, they had workshops of people who painted in their style. So this is After Raphael, and it's a sketch of Hanno, the white elephant that was given to the Pope from the King of Portugal, and Mahout, that's the word for an Indian elephant keeper. And so we can see the men from India who accompanied Hanno on his journey from India to Portugal and then from Portugal to Rome. We also have these, can't trace these specific cheetahs to a specific person, but this is just, I just think it's a beautiful drawing from 1400. Cheetahs were often trained as hunting animals during this period. So wealthy Europeans would hunt with cheetahs alongside dogs and things like that. And we also have it on material objects. This is a
question about
plate.
the elephant, actually.
Yeah, please.
So you say it's a white elephant, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just drawing a blank on it. Like, white elephants, do they exist? Are they, like, super rare? Is this an albino elephant? Like,
Yeah,
is
maybe
this
it's albino. I don't know. That's a good question. I wonder, I'm looking it up on my phone. White elephant.
Wondering if even I know in certain indigenous cultures here in America, there's that belief of like
Yeah.
that, you know, the ghost animal. I'm wondering if there was any kind
Yeah,
of
it's a
beliefs around there
white,
being like a spiritual element to it.
what is that animal that it's in DC? They talk about it before. It's the white
Ghost bear.
Yeah,
The ghost bear, yeah. But the ghost bears are actually white. I don't know. Everything that I know, there's actually a lot of documentation about the Pope's elephant. There's one point where there was like war breaking out somewhere, and the Pope's elephant died. This Hanno died, and the Pope like was so distraught and that he refused to leave and go deal with this war that was breaking out. So there's actually a lot of surviving materials about the elephant, and it's always described as being white. So maybe it was albino. I don't know. A bunch of images of white elephants are coming up when I Google it. I don't know. Does anybody else know? Yeah.
I'm curious if it was actually white or like a really light, like gray, maybe. Because African
Could be.
elephants are more brownish, while Indian elephants, I think they're more lighter. I think.
Um. Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely got the ears of an Indian elephant in that image there. Yeah.
Just something I'm turning up on Google, which I find kind of funny.
Yeah.
A historic practice from King Siam, so of Thailand, well, now
Yeah.
Thailand, and that giving someone a rare albino elephant to courtiers that displeased him was a way to ruin them because they had to afford the upkeep of the animal because it was more expensive to take care of this albino elephant. So it was like,
Yeah. That's funny.
So spiteful. You just give somebody an elephant to financially
Yeah.
bad. You have to hate them.
Hope you have enough rice and butter. Yeah.
I found the answer to the white elephant thing. It's an albino. At
Okay.
least, I mean, this is what Wikipedia is saying, so take that with a grain of salt, mind you. But still, there's record of it.
Yeah. Also, that's a saying. To say that something's a white elephant, doesn't that mean to say that it's sort of like a thing that you can't get rid of or something? I think it's also a term.
my family does white elephant gift exchanges at Christmas.
Yeah.
And it's where you have like a bunch of presents in the middle and you don't know what they are and everyone takes a turn. It's random and you pick a gift. And then there's the idea of everyone who goes after either gets to steal a gift or pick a new one. So it's kind of this underhanded, you don't know what you're going to end up with, but it's a gift, but there's like an element of spite and maybe some oh no to it.
Like what you were just saying about the King of Thailand. I think
Very
it's also,
funny.
I think it's a saying. I think it's like a colloquialism that means to like have something that you can't get rid of. And it's sort of like a possession that's a burden. I think you can call something a white elephant. Okay, so that's the Pope's elephant. This image, we have this plate that again, this could be in the center. Oh, again, you can't see my cursor. Okay, so this is a plate from the 1500s in Italy. And you can see the elephant, and there's some camel, and then there's the long-necked creature in the background. That could potentially also be another depiction of Lorenzo's giraffe. It's unclear. And there again, it's sort of like, kind of looks like a giraffe, kind of not. Do I have one more? And then, yeah, to come back to this image, which we've already looked at, but you can also see the parrots and the monkeys. There's lions, goat, sheep, which are more sort of pedestrian to Europeans, and the turkey, which is the symbol of the Americas in many ways. And then at the bottom of the steps there's this strange creature, kind of looks like a cat or like a rodent of some type. And I think that might be a civet, which is, I think it belongs to the cat family, and a civet can come from Asia or Africa. And in the Renaissance and early modern period, they were highly prized because from civet is where people derived musk that they would use to make perfumes. So civet was like a really prized and sought after animal because you could excrete it and use the excretions to make very expensive perfumes. So animals, and particularly these exotic animals, were very much a part of the Renaissance European world. So when I think back to that kind of like, what's going on moment that I had when I was cycling through Germany and then all of a sudden came across a meadow that had lions in it, you can imagine that for Renaissance Europeans, they would have also often had these kind of, jolting moments, whether it was Lorenzo's giraffe walking down the street as you turned a corner, or walking by a fabulous palace and it's got a pride of lionesses in marble cages out front, or monkeys and parrots in marketplaces, all of that type of stuff. And maybe just beyond, to go back to thinking about the deeper implications of this, beyond just sort of being interesting and giving us a deeper understanding of Renaissance artworks. And now we can all sort of be on the lookout for these animals when we look at Renaissance artworks. Beyond that, we can also draw some other insights from this. One thing that is really clear from looking at Renaissance Europe is that the animal trade and the exotic animal trade was a key part of political diplomacy. And that was how political power and political favors often centered around the trading of these exotic animals. So these animals weren't just sent from one ruler to the other, or one powerful individual to the other for no reason. They were almost always sent to symbolize a larger request or a political alliance that was trying to be fostered. For example, the Egyptian Sultan had sent the giraffe, Lorenzo's giraffe, to Lorenzo de' Medici in 1487 because he was asking for military aid and financial aid from Florence and the wealthy Medici family, as he was engaged in warfare with the Ottoman Empire, which was an expanding neighboring Islamic empire that eventually took over the Egyptian Sultanate. And the Egyptian Sultan sent this draft because he was asking for military aid and financial aid. Similarly, when the King of Portugal sent the white elephant to Pope Leo X, it was meant to be a token that symbolized Portugal's request for the Pope's support for Portuguese colonial endeavors in southwestern India and in sub-Saharan Africa. And what the Portuguese were after is that they wanted the Pope to proclaim that the Portuguese had jurisdiction over colonialism in those areas, that other Europeans, like the Dutch, for example, couldn't encroach on Portuguese colonial efforts in sub-Saharan Africa or in southwestern India. And the elephant was sort of to sweeten this deal, to try to get the Pope to do what they wanted. And when we look at diplomatic letters that have survived from this period, you see references to the movement of exotic animals as part of diplomacy happening all the time. For example, here's a quote from a letter of one very powerful Italian man writing to another very powerful Italian man. And he says, I have not been able before now to send your lordship the lions that I had promised you some days ago for their fierceness. Now I send them along with a man who usually looks after them so that he can give instructions in the ways required to handle them. So often in the midst of political negotiations, you'll often find references to lions and tigers and bears and cheetahs and hippos. Here's another one. Again, another very powerful Italian who's saying that yesterday the King of France received 2 cheetahs that the Duke of Ferrara had sent, one for His Majesty and the other for the Queen. And today they've been run, so the cheetahs have been run, and then I think they're going to be sent as a gift to the King of England, who would have been Henry VIII at this period. So we also often see the recycling of exotic animal gifts, that one powerful ruler would get them and then he would keep them for a while, or she would keep them for a while, and then they would send them on to the next powerful person. So there was a lot of, much like your family game, Kima, of White Elephant, there was a lot of recycling and offloading of these animals, reusing them, regifting.
It's interesting.
So
how they're
exotic
also
animals were
like...
used to, sorry, yeah?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so exotic animals were used to kind of broker these political alliances, to sweeten requests for military aid, for example. And they were also used in the same way to display power and prestige. As I mentioned, at one point, for example, the Medici rulers of Florence had 25 lions living in their palace, right in the center of the city. You would have had to walk by to run your errands every day. And you can think about kind of the way that that's supposed to display power and prowess, right? So another important point connected to that is how animals, and exotic animals in particular, were really used as symbols of European colonialism and imperial mastery. Again, that brings us back to the more serious topic that we were discussing a couple minutes ago about that parade of animals that was sent to the Pope, along with a group of African men that were given as exotic gifts. In this image, for example, that we've looked at a few times, that's painted on the villa walls of the Medici villa, where the giraffe, the Lorenzo's giraffe, briefly lived. We can see animals from Africa, from Asia, and from the Americas. We have the turkey from the Americas. We have the giraffe and lions from Africa, and we have these parrots and the civet and these monkeys, likely from Asia. And I think the statement that's being made by depicting these animals in this artwork is pretty clear. It's meant to suggest possession and mastery, not only over these animals, but the lands that they originate from and the people who live in those lands. So the animals are kind of a proxy or a mirror or a way to communicate these deeper colonial and imperial European ambitions during this period, which makes sense because the early modern period, 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, really is the age of European colonialism.
May I jump in?
Yeah.
Two things. I guess when you were going over the gift giving, that's something that's really in most cultures I'm studying at any time period, gift giving is central to so many things. And it seems like we've kind of come to a point where, at this the saying that we use today, what do you get a man who has everything? And we're starting to go beyond functionality to, it might even be dysfunctional, but it matters in that sense.
Right. And that only somebody who has everything could afford to take care of these animals.
Yeah. And
yeah,
I obviously didn't think of this before, but I'm kind of reading this now as I would Orientalism, where
for sure. Same way.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing in that same kind of representing other cultures that I have mastery over, which you really don't, but you have tokens now that you can show off.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I think what you're getting at, Kima, too, is like really thinking about what we mean when we use that term exotic,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
Exotic
totally.
animals. Like exotic to who? And what makes them exotic? And the way in which exoticness is often tinged with these, or steeped even, not just tinged, steeped in these notions of us and them, cultural hierarchies, mastery or control over another culture, another landscape, another animal kingdom. So not only is it humans asserting mastery over the animal kingdom, but I think that these particular exotic animals, by being labeled exotic and by being trafficked throughout Europe, are also meant to speak to the way in which Europeans wanted to depict themselves as having control over other regions of the world too. That they collected the animals of the rest of the world and other parts of the world didn't collect their animals. I mean, it could just be because like a sheep is just not as cool as a giraffe. But yeah, that's Orientalism for sure. Okay, so one last thing, maybe to sort of like move into the final section, is maybe something that we've kind of been touching on and that you've probably been thinking about, is that these animals lived sad lives. Yeah, we talked about the loneliness that these animals may have felt. And so we should think about animal agency here and animal welfare. What's the history of animal welfare? Often these animals were not treated well. They often didn't live for very long. But what I do find interesting is that there are moments that are significant to me where we can see these animals pushing back, sort of refusing to do what these humans are demanding of them and expressing their animal agency. For instance, in 1459, a different pope, not the pope who had the white elephant, but a different pope, a guy named Pope Pius II, he came on a diplomatic visit, a dignitary visit to the city of Florence, where this artwork is from that we're looking at. And to sort of celebrate the Pope's visit to the city, Florence organized a huge animal fight. They turned that main piazza where a couple years later, Lorenzo would build that scaffolding so that people could watch the giraffe coming in. They turned that same square into an arena, and they were trying to sort of recreate the Colosseums of the Roman period. And they wanted to host a big animal fight like they had read about happening in the Roman Empire. So they had lions released into the square along with wild boars and horses and dogs and wolves and bulls. And they wanted them all to fight and kill each other as sort of this celebration of the Pope and recalling the grandeur of the Roman Empire. But the animals refused. The lions did not perform. Instead, they withdrew into the corners and tried to flee throughout the city. So I like that moment of, in the face of the kind of brutal treatment of these animals, we have moments of the animals pushing back and refusing to do what the humans are asking of them. Similarly, in Portugal in the 1500s, a fight was arranged between an elephant and a rhino. Here we have Albrecht Dürer, who's another very famous Renaissance artist. And here he's depicting a rhino that had made its way to Portugal. So it could be the same rhino. There wasn't that many of them. And in the 1500s, a fight was organized, perhaps between this rhino that we see here and an elephant. And here too, the animals refused to fight each other. The elephant fled and the rhino hid, and the elephant stampeded through the town. As a result, maybe the humans were sort of unhappy with the animals, that they had failed to perform in the ways that they wanted them to. So the rhino was then sent to Rome to be a gift for Pope Leo X, who had his white elephant. And maybe the theory was that the Pope could try to pit the rhino and the elephant against each other. But the rhino died in a shipwreck on the journey across the Mediterranean. So again, thinking about sort of the lonely existence of these animals. So yeah, I guess maybe takeaways. I think thinking about interspecies histories, thinking about our relationship with animals and our treatment of animals can reveal a lot about a particular society. And the Renaissance and early modern period is often talked about and framed as an age of collecting. People collected objects during the Renaissance, jewels, artworks, tapestries. And one of the other things that they collected are animals, and that's really displayed through the surviving artworks of the Renaissance period. And we can also think about how the movement and gifting and treatment of animals was deeply linked to politics and power and diplomacy and colonialism and imperialism and all of that important stuff. So from Joe Exotic to cheetahs in the 1400s, we can think about the long history of trafficking exotic animals. And thus concludes my talk. Maybe I'll
clapping in the background here.
Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that I can see everybody.
Lorenzo de Medici and a mullet. Charlotte, I would pay good money for an artistic commission of that, I swear.
Well,
The idea of that.
I mean, all we need is some Photoshop. We could make that happen.
Right?
Someone needs to like become a classical painter so we can get this happen.
Yes, yes. Maybe we can get some department funding. This is what the society should ask for. Department
Yes.
funding to commission
Our
Lorenzo with
last
his
thing that
mullet.
we do with the society this year, we're gonna go storm the dean's office and
Yes, we demand. Yeah.
Oh no. That's, even in terms of what you said about agency, about animals refusing to fight in that sense,
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating too to just think that their simple livelihood and existence, how they go about living their own lives, shapes how we live as much as them refusing to do something. It's, why are we even
Totally.
interested in them? Why would we even, you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
and again, I'm more so thinking in terms of wolves, just because I know how much that's changed over time, and it's more so a reflection of how we see ourselves and how we see nature.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I think our treatment of animals, the way that we moralize them, treat some animals as more worthy than others, the way it's always a reflection of ourselves. Yeah.
I love the
yeah,
term
right.
trash animals. That's very reflective. What's a trash animal?
Trash animals. Yeah.
like yeah,
In
even drawing
Toronto.
back on that other point there, you said like in a movie, no one really cares if a snake dies, but if a
I
dog
know.
dies, it's
I
like
know.
it's horrible. But
You
yet the
gotta have
snake is just
disclaimers for the
scary.
horses.
Yeah, or the horses too.
I know, but it's so hard to get away. Like none of you guys are snake people, are you?
I love snakes.
I
You
am
love snakes,
I love
Kiva?
terrified of snakes to the point where
But you can't love snakes.
You. I remember when I first held one, and I thought that it was the
Ooh.
coolest feeling animal that I've ever felt.
Mhm.
And oh yeah,
Mhm.
yes, I know I'm an outlier, but I think it's that whole obsession with dragons when I was a kid. I'm like,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. I mean, I see what you're saying, Avery. Like inherently, they're equally as valuable and have a right to live and as much as
Yeah.
anything else. But it's like, but just don't tell people that, Kima. Just kidding. I'm kidding.
So should I
I'm
keep it
kidding.
quiet that I like spiders too?
Now you're just digging a deeper hole. Yeah.
Avery?
Do you have something to say? Yeah.
Yes, I made a small thing.
Okay.
You made a thing?
Yes, I made like typed out a small scenario with two lords with this animals thing you said.
Huh?
Never mind. I'm gonna post it.
Oh, okay. Wait, we will wait.
I hope it makes sense.
Okay, I thought you were gonna say you like are a master of Photoshop and you very quickly photoshopped a mullet onto Lorenzo.
Oh no. It's
Great.
basically
I think I want to do that now.
Yes.
Yeah. That could be the History Society mascot.
okay.
There
Here
we
it is.
go.
King.
It-
Let's make this alliance official. By
Oh.
you marrying by my dog.
It'd probably
Give me
be
a
like
rhino.
cut off.
Okay.
Yeah, we're throwing out the traditional marriage. I'm just giving you a rhino now.
Absolutely. I take that offer.
Yep.
I hope it makes sense.
You've written
I
like
keep
a short
thinking of the
story.
image of like putting a giraffe on a carriage and just carting it through the streets of
Oh,
like
gosh.
the Italian countryside. It's the funniest thing in my brain of just a giraffe per
I
carriage.
know.
Or
I know.
I
Yeah,
even
because
had the
it's
idea of
yeah.
a
Two
giraffe
lords.
walking down the street, just doing its own thing, like looking around, like, what is going on? Why are these people staring at me?
Well, that was
Can
the
I tell
thing
you-
why I wish we had any kind of travel journals, because I'm just imagining the villages going through. If you didn't see it, no one's gonna believe you. Being
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
not, yeah, when I saw rolling through the streets, they'd be like, you're crazy.
This actually
I know.
remind me of a situation from a book.
What's the book?
Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, really?
Okay, one of the villains basically he would release wild dog like rare exotic wild dogs he had, like to describe how much of a bad evil person he was. He would release them upon the peasantry.
Was this
Okay.
Holmes's enemy? What's his name? Moriarty or something like that?
No. It was
Moriarty.
from one of the random ones.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, can you imagine that? Like one king, like, oh, my rhinos seem bored, or my hippo. Let them play with the villagers.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I've never come across I've never seen anyone purposely using their animals as weapons
You would
in
think
this
so.
period. That would be interesting. Yeah.
Get strap armor on the hippo and get tossed into the front lines.
They did use dogs in war as Italian Mastiff dogs.
Cane Corso. Oh yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Cane
it's
Corso they used as war dogs.
yeah, it's so
Also,
bad.
war animals I always thought was kind of interesting. Like the idea of like how in ancient period, how they had like the war elephants and they had the whole like little thing
Yeah.
on top where they could ride them, and it's just like it's wild to
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, that's like a whole other thing about thinking about animal agency. Like how animals are used in war or how they experience war. There's a big monument in London. It's like not that far from Buckingham Palace, and it's a monument to all of the horses and dogs that died in the world wars.
Because no one ever talks about the poor horses that are in war and get shot. Because I always feel
I
bad
know.
for them, and no one ever acknowledges it.
I know. Well, this monument does.
There you go.
Yeah.
Avery, do you know how to spell armor?
ARMOR, or
Okay.
sometimes with a U, depending on how you.
MOUR if you're Canadian. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Are you posting another thing?
The Dark Ages missed the chance to use armor war hippo. I mean,
The hippos are nasty.
Yeah.
They're not like big and lovable. No, they will rip you apart.
Exactly, the perfect war machine.
Really, yeah.
I'm joking, of course, but
I know.
Well, I guess that's one of the like in terms of war horses especially, and dogs in a bit of a different way, but when you think about training an animal to go completely against its nature, like to not be afraid of certain things and to keep going in spite of that. When we do that to ourselves, it's interesting to think about doing it to not humans.
Yeah.
I actually heard about an interesting fact about like exotic animals as pets for nobility. I remember the first person to be killed by a tiger in Europe was actually because they kept on like purposely whacking its nose with a stick.
Could be, yeah.
Like one of the servants. It was an interesting history thing I once remembered a few years back.
Yeah, there's a few cases of yes, there's the hippo, the Medici hippo that killed someone. There's a lion that mauled someone. Yeah.
What are giraffes generally like? Are they like? No one ever really talks about like what their demeanor is like. Are they?
Yeah, no one talks
hostile?
about giraffes enough. Yeah.
Don't they can like whip their necks like hammers?
Like that's why I was.
Yeah.
Are they like aggressive animals? Are they peaceful? Like that's something I've never really thought about until now.
They can definitely trample things, and I've seen males fighting during that season,
I don't know
and
if you
my
guys have
goodness,
seen
the
the
sound.
videos online of them like chasing like African safari cars or anything like that. But part of me
Yeah.
always wonders is like, are they just being playful, or is it the get the hell off my lawn type of scenario where they're out for blood?
Any herbivore has to be able to defend itself, right? So, like,
Mhm.
I think anything, even if it's not wanting to kill you to eat you, there's that defense that's built in. And I don't know. I'm just big animals I don't mess with. It's like a moose. I don't mess with moose.
You know,
Yeah.
you never want to mess with a moose because they will destroy you in your car.
They will.
Also, I also heard in ancient China, a Chinese emperor got like a pet giraffe, and he proclaimed it the mythical Kirin, their equivalent to the unicorn.
That wouldn't surprise me. If you take Scott's Monsters and Monstrosity class, you talk about the animals that the ancient people thought were monsters. Like my favorite one is the yes, the mammoth. It was on our trivia last week. I should know that.
The mammoth?
Yeah, they thought
skull
the
of the
mammoth was
mammoth,
a
because of the way
cyclops.
that it's formed, it's like there's a giant hole in the middle of the skull. That's not what it really was when you actually put flesh onto an animal, but they saw that and said one eye, cyclops.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that on maps. There's like a lot of medieval maps have like these
Mappa
have
Mundi, I think there's
Mappa Mundi.
Yeah.
there's, monsters on it.
There's the what are they called? It starts with a C. They have just like a giant foot, like one giant foot.
Oh, I know, yeah.
Something like that.
Centaur?
Yeah. Hmm?
The centaur? The
No,
half
no, no. That's half man, half horse.
Yeah. Wait,
Seppa something.
you said like the one, like the humanoid with 1 foot?
Yeah.
I heard that. It was I
I think you're thinking of monopods or skyopods.
Monopods.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you ever heard about the humans with the faces on their chest without the head?
Yeah.
That one too.
Talk about those in the monster class too. You should take that monster
Troglodytes?
class. You would love it.
Yeah, that sounds like a cool class.
It's a
Does he
wacky
talk
class.
about so great.
mermaids? I think we
We never
talked
brought up
about
mermaids.
They're
Yeah, there was
brought
things
up
we never got to.
mermaids.
Nope.
We never got to that, and I remember we were gonna do like robots at one point there too, but we never got to it because it was just like it was waiting for the whole like AI talk, but we never got to that either.
Well, there's so much to cover.
There's so much, yeah.
Like, I mean, AI probably safe. Like, take Skynet for example. Never hurt anyone.
Those Terminator movies were made for a reason.
I don't know. It's
Or, like,
fascinating that we assume humans are evil and that we only hurt things.
Or don't
Interesting
forget-
that, I don't know.
I mean, history's kind of told us that.
Yeah.
Don't forget the Space Odyssey. Remember how helpful that one AI was? Forgot the name.
What are you citing?
You know the one with the space station where the artificial intelligence killing everyone one by one?
Oh, are you citing 2001?
2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, Hal or something like that. I've never seen
Howard.
it. Yeah.
Hal.
Yeah, I've never seen that.
I just
Right.
know the memes or whatever. I'm sorry, Dave.
Mhm.
I can't do that. That's all I know.
Okay.
Julia,
Yeah.
one quick thing about